Okay, greetings to everybody that will be joining me here in the fullness of time. Tomorrow is the anniversary of 9/11. It's been 24 years, and it was brought to my attention more closely than usual because I was made aware that tomorrow Tucker Carlson is going to release a documentary on 9/11, which is supposed to say that it was all a lie from start to finish, and that if it's correct, which I assume it is because that's what the Tucker Carlson preview said, that'll be very interesting indeed. Now, I don't have the answers to 9/11, and so far, very few people do. But I do have at least the questions to 9/11, and that's almost as important as having the answers to 9/11 because people don't ask the right questions. People might say, what qualifications have you to discuss 9/11? Are you a structural engineer? Or are you this or that or the other? Well, in actual fact, I am, believe it or not. I did a civil engineering in UCG back in the good old days. Graduated anyway with a Bachelor of Civil Engineering. So that was all well and good. As part of that course, I did structural engineering as well, namely high-rise buildings, reinforced steel, etc. Rudimentary stuff enough, and it's not rocket science either. As part of the course, we actually studied rocket science as well, and rocket science is rocket science. It's not as complicated as structural engineering, though. Take that from me because I did both of them. Anyway, that would allow me perhaps to have somewhat of a better insight into this situation than a regular person on the street. Maybe not as good as a structural engineer that will have 50 years of working in buildings that's 100 stories high or whatever, but still better than most. I will also, of course, have digested the 9/11 Commission report. I had to dig this out of my basement library. I have a few libraries, but it's down there. Got this from a library sale. I paid $1 for it. I likely paid too much money for it, but it is what it is. I have it and I've read it. It is designed to be very, very boring, and it's designed to confuse as much as anything else. And it's designed really to put the closing touches on a mystery or a case. So if anybody ever has any questions, they'll say, oh, just go and read the 9/11 Commission report. And that, of course, is taken as gospel. It's a Bible. Be that as it may. Now, some little questions before I even talk about the event itself. Perhaps people will be familiar with this movie, The Patriot. It's a very good movie. Mel Gibson is one of my favorite actors. That came out in the summer of 2000, I believe that came out. The opening scene of that is very interesting for those that are knowledgeable into what they're looking at, which is very few because people will look at things and if they don't have the knowledge, they will not even know what they're looking at. But they'll look at it anyway and they'll be happy. The opening scene, and you can check it yourself, don't take my word for it. The opening scene of The Patriot, anyway, we've got Mel Gibson and he's sitting in his front room or whatever, and he's working diligently making a rocking chair. And when he's finished this rocking chair, he will admire it, and it's very nice, it's beautiful, etc. And he will hang it up on a scale because he wishes to weigh the rocking chair. And the scale, of course, will tell the weight of the chair, and the chair's weight is 9 pounds and 11 ounces. And he takes it down from the scale and he sets it on the floor, and he gently lowers his frame onto the chair, and it seems to be working very, very nicely. He is very, very happy, and a few seconds later, the chair crumbles into small little pieces. And he picks himself up and he is angry and shocked and what this, that, and the other. He takes up the broken chair and he tosses it into a room off to the side. And when we look into the room off to the side, well, guess what's in the room off to the side? There's numerous earlier renditions of the rocking chair, each and every one of them broken up into smithereens as well due to his weight on the rocking chair. You might say to yourself, well, why didn't he make it a little bit heavier and a little bit more sturdy? Well, if he made it 9 pounds and 12 ounces, a little bit heavier, perhaps the event would have taken place the next day. I don't know. Anyway, but we are given to believe this happened in such a way, and we must ask questions, and there's a few oddities. We were told that some people from the Middle East boarded a plane up in Portland, Maine, going through security there. They flew down to Logan Airport, going through security there. Security in those days would be a lot more lax than it is today, but that's two securities anyway. And they had baggage with them. Now remember, these guys are going on a one-way trip. There ain't no return ticket needed, and they most certainly do not need a change of clothes or anything like that at all. Let's just say they could be traveling very light. They got on 2 planes in Boston, and the planes took off, and off they went. 2 other planes coming out of at different airports, they took off. 4 planes took off, 19 men, 4 in each of 3 of them and 3 in the other. And at sometimes into the flights, we are told that they using just box cutters, which is a very ineffective weapon if you're thinking of doing anything serious. They will have taken over those planes. Now, if I'm planning a hijacking, that's taking a huge chance, because these guys would not be the biggest and the strongest, and if there was a rugby team on one of the planes or whatever, well, we would know where that box cutter would end up, don't we? But anyway, they did it. Supposedly they did it. Anyway, they flew off into the air, and sometime later they commandeered the 4 planes, and now the 4 planes are coming to their targets, which is the Twin Towers and the Pentagon and some other unknown building, which wasn't hit because the other plane was taken from the sky. When the 2 planes hit the Twin Towers, we have seen a big plane, and it flies into the tower. You would imagine that the plane would crumble because it's aluminum and it's hitting steel. But it does have a heck of an amount of a momentum. So that momentum will carry through indeed. It won't just bounce off. That momentum is very heavy. But in some of the video, we see that the plane's cone, the front of the plane, the nose of the plane, comes out the other side. That, of course, is an impossibility, regardless of the momentum, because the plane would be pancaked in and demolished. But the momentum and the bulk might continue on and create damage. That would be the first thing that you would say to yourself, this just cannot happen. But it did. Maybe it did happen. We don't know. That's one thing. Second thing I noticed that day, everybody, of course, is tuning in that day and watching it very, very closely. One of the broadcasters, I'm not sure whether it was CNN or CBS, but one of them anyway, they interviewed a fellow at the bottom of the towers, or near the towers anyway, and he was dressed in a black leather jacket. And there was an unusual fellow standing behind him, sort of keeping an eye on him, or whatever. It was very unusual. Now, just think to yourself, there's very few people that can speak clearly off the top of their head, such as I'm doing here, without stuttering and stammering. And indeed, I do that myself. So it's very, very unusual for anybody really to be interviewed live on TV, unless they're somewhat trained in the art, because, well, they're going to be under a little bit of pressure and the excitement, this, that, and the other. Now, to put a fellow, just a passerby, and interview him in the footprint of a major terrorist disaster and expect that person to be able to speak clearly is next nigh to impossible. So that's another thing you must consider. Who is this fellow, or where did he come from, or what was his story? And he introduced the narrative. He's the one that first came up with the term ground zero. This fellow, we're led to believe that this guy is just a guy that was passing on his way to a cup of coffee in the morning or whatever. That too, I would say to myself, is almost next to impossible. Anyway, the fires are burning, the buildings have been damaged. When a building is damaged up near the top, obviously the vertical uprights will be destroyed on one side and much less weakened on the other side. So simple gravity would determine that those towers would actually lean to the weaker side, but neither did. So we have to dwell upon that as well. Now, some people say that that fuel melted the steel. Well, and they say that the temperature of the fuel burning is, I think it was 1300 degrees, and the temperature of the steel to melt would be 2500 degrees, which could not happen. Now, you do not need the steel to melt for the buildings to collapse. You need the steel to be weakened. If the steel is weakened, it will, to use the simple term, sag. And then, of course, that'll put stresses on the bolts, etc., and it could actually collapse due to that. So you can accept that as fairly common sense and a little bit of simple enough engineering. But what you cannot accept is that you'll actually see in videos the steel actually melting, which is an impossibility because the fuel is not hot enough to do that. That means there had to be some sort of an outside force or an accelerant to make that steel melt. And the video of the steel melting is there. So that is something that actually is impossible given the information that you're told. Okay, so the towers collapsed. There's other people then that say the towers could not have collapsed at the speed it did collapse, because if it's pancaking down, that will break the momentum somewhat and it could not fall at the speed it is, which is referred to as free fall. Okay? Well, maybe or maybe not. But you must ask yourself the simple question. The elevator shafts will obviously be made from reinforced concrete. What force is working down on the shaft? There's no force at all working down on the shaft, because the shaft is the shaft that always had the same force working down upon it. Those elevator shafts made from reinforced concrete could not actually collapse down in of themselves like it did. But it appears to happen. And then, of course, you will have some very strange things happening in the surrounding areas. You will have cars melted and seared and burned. And that, of course, there was no explanation of that in the year 2001. And then there was dust all over the place up the two towers, then are down. In the debris with all that confusion, some fella's passport was found unburned. Now, you have to ask yourself, what happened to the pocket it was in, or the pouch it was in, or whatever? Well, that had to be burned. And was the pocket not still attached to a pants? And was a pants not attached to a buttock? And was a buttock not attached to the fellow that was owning the buttock? That too is an impossibility. But anyway, take it as it is. Let's follow the story as it was presented to us. As we watched that day, the people on the TV were getting handed pieces of paper and they will just read the paper. And then you have to say to yourself, well, who printed those words onto the paper and where did it come from? And amazingly enough, The people over in London, the people in Sydney, the people in Canada, they all seem to be reading the exact same script, which meant all those words came from one location, and you can figure it out yourself where that location might have been. Okay, those were the two towers, and that was the end of the two towers for the moment. The next scene of activity was the Pentagon. We were told then that a plane flew into the Pentagon. Now, flying into the Pentagon, that takes some skill because that's not a 110 story high tower at 1,014 feet, whatever the height the towers were. I was up on the towers, but I can't remember the exact height. But they were high, they were over 1,000 feet. I think that's only a 3 story building. For that plane to fly in there, it had to be brought down, it had to be reversed through 270 degrees, it had to drop in elevation. Then the difficult part was it had to fly into those 3 stories at more or less a level plane. Because if it was at an angle coming down at a slope, it would either miss the Pentagon or it would fly into the ground before the Pentagon. But that means it has to fly in horizontally or very, very close to it. Problem with that scenario is there is light poles, etc., that was in the path of the plane that by some miracle were not destroyed, which of course is an impossibility. There was something like 39 cameras taking footage. The Pentagon is the Pentagon, it's not a local or anything like that. The Pentagon is the Pentagon, so obviously it's surrounded by cameras and with heavy security night and day, 24 hours a day. None of that video footage was released immediately. Small little footage was released many years later, showing just a few frames and what appeared to be a fireball flying into the building. That, of course, was inappropriate as well. That's impossible to believe. It's also impossible to believe that a fellow that was described as a practically useless pilot for a small Cessna was able to fly a commercial jet, which is it's the same as me saying I bought a little drone the other day for $90, and after a couple of hours, well, guess what? I was able to fly it up into the air. The drone is automatic anyway. It's like saying I'd be able to fly a helicopter around Boston. Flying a Cessna and flying a commercial airline jet in a 270 descending loop is not the same thing. That's Some people have told me it's impossible to do that. Even if you had 30 years experience driving that size airline. But believe it as you wish. Then, of course, when that jet is hitting the sides of the Pentagon, the initial photographs of the damage done to the Pentagon just showed a large hole, but not wide enough to account for the jet engines that I believe they are made of titanium. They're not going to melt or anything like that. They were going right through the wall. And then, of course, there's no bodies that was found, to the best of my knowledge, there's either, and no baggage. There was nothing involved. There was some debris, etc., and there was debate as to whether it was debris from that particular type of jet at all. Some people say it couldn't have been done. It had to be instead a cruise missile or what we today call a drone, Predator drone or whatever. Also, with the planes going into the Twin Towers, some people say they were not piloted at all, they were drones. At that time, it was said it's impossible. There's no such thing as a drone. Other people say the planes were taken over and flown remotely. They said that's impossible. But of course, we now know it is possible. Happens all the time. Drones remotely, you can take over a plane and fly it remotely, hack it into it, and you're all set. So those are just some questions. Now, the fourth plane, of course, was flying in, and it was heading towards Washington, D.C., or so we are told. Then, of course, We were also told that there was phone calls being made from the plane. There was only two ways to make a phone call from a plane. The earphones that were in existence in those days, if you wanted to make a phone call, you would take out your credit card and you'd be patched through and you could talk to Uncle Tommy or whatever. But there'd be a record of that because your credit card would be deducted and you'd have to go through the process. So any call that was made would have been logged. Then, when that log did not exist, for the wife of the journalist, she was a journalist, but he was an inspector general, he was an important fellow. Her testimony, or so we are told, to him is what is a lot of this stuff is based on the box cutters at all. When he was asked about whether it was the earphone and did he have the receipts, etc., he says no, it was from a cell phone. It's impossible to call from a cell phone in the year 2001 from 15 to 30,000 feet traveling at 500 miles an hour and switching from one station. The technology just wasn't there. I don't even not the mind then. Today, if you want to use your cell phone, you've got to hook up to the Wi-Fi of the jet or whatever. Again, all these things are next night to impossible. And that's some of just the questions. When this is all said and done, then that plane is coming in, it's approaching, it's assumed it's heading to the White House, or at least we're told it's heading to the White House. Some other people have a different theory as to where it was heading. They believed it was heading towards this other building in the complex of the World Trade Center called Building 7. Now, Building 7 was 47 stories high. It's a very big building, but if it's behind two that's 200 and 110 stories high, then it's not really accessible. So it makes perfect sense if you wanted to target that building, you'd have the other two taken out first, and then the other plane is going to come in with a clear run in and destroy Building 7. Building 7 was not just a regular building. Building 7 was where the electronic files and all the records of both the CIA and the even more important NSA, and the more important, again, SEC, which is the Securities and Exchange Commission. There is a theory that a huge amount of money had gone missing the day before, $1 trillion. And the theory is that those records would expose who had actually stolen it. Some other people say no, there was a 30-year bond series coming through, and that had to be eliminated as well. We don't really know. So that building now is standing. It's burning from debris from about 10 a.m. and now it's into the afternoon. The plane that was coming in maybe to hit that, we are told that the passengers got together and they charged the hijackers and overpowered them. And in the melee and in the struggle, the plane just nosedived into the ground. Problem with that situation is the debris from that particular plane is spread over a wide area, which means one thing and one thing only: the plane broke up in mid-air, which most likely was the result of it being hit by a air-to-air missile. People that have looked into this, they have identified a pilot of a fighter jet that supposedly shot down this plane. But the US Air Force shooting down this plane would not fit nicely into the narrative at all. So that story is submerged. You can believe it or not, I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but it's just another facet of the whole thing. Now, when the plane did not hit the building, it's a problem then, because those records must be destroyed because that was the objective in the opinion of some. So about 5 p.m., guess what happened? The building totally collapsed. Now, there was a serious problem with the building collapsing because about 34 minutes before that, the BBC were doing a live commentary. And the lady was reporting from New York City. She was reading a piece of paper that was given to her. She's reading the script. And the script is saying the Solomon Building, which was the official name for the Building 7, it has collapsed. But while she was saying this, of course, everybody looking over her shoulder could see that the Solomon Building, that is Building 7 in the background, was still intact. It hadn't collapsed at all. So somebody had written this before the event. Well, they either could tell the future or the plan had gone awry. So the building anyway imploded and it collapsed in freefall, exactly like any building that will be brought down by a controlled demolition. And that was the end of Building 7. Now, the fellow that owned or had the lease on these two buildings, he had them well insured. He had insured them for double the price, and he paid a significantly less amount of money that you might have thought for those buildings, because those buildings were very much contaminated with asbestos. They were actually nearing the end, or indeed well past the end of their life, and they would have to be totally rehabbed, and you can imagine what that would cost. This fellow, anyway, his name is Silverstein. Silverstein was a man of habit, and his habit was the same every single day. He would have his breakfast up on the beautiful restaurant up there at the top of the tower. And every single day he'd have his breakfast up there. Except for one day, of course. That was September the 11th. We are told that he had to go to the dentist that day. His teeth must have been perfect because that's the only day he had to go to the dentist up to that point. That's a bit of a coincidence indeed. Lucky for him. Not so lucky for everybody else who was in the building, so they all died. Every single one of them. Because there was no escape. If you were above the fire zone, you were doomed. Simple as that. And even if you were below the fire zone, you were doomed too if you were unlucky enough not to get out in time. And that was that. There was one other aspect of this that I found myself to be very, very questionable. Before this event, somebody or some group of people decided to play the stock exchange aggressively. You can do that by buying options. If you wish or hope that or expect the stock to rise, you'll buy a call, CALL. If you expect the stock to sink quickly and far within a time period, you'll buy what's known as a put, P-U-T, put. These are very, very high gambles, but the return is very, very high if you just so happen to be lucky or otherwise enough to hit it. And it just so happened that some group of people had bought a huge amount of puts on the airline stocks, which when the airline stocks fell a very significant amount, they became very, very valuable indeed. Now, you cannot just walk in off the street and buy a put or a call or an option or even any share at all or a security. You've got to give your social security number, your name, etc. You've got to give everything about yourself. Otherwise, you cannot open a trade on the stock exchange. So those puts were worth a lot of money, but they were not sold or exercised, which means that whoever had bought them realized that they had made a mistake, and if they exercised or sold those puts, they would then have to answer the obvious question: did you know that this was going to happen? They decided not to do that. Now, that is a very, very important thing. That is a smoking gun. That is only gets one line of a mention in this book because I read it twice to see it's swept under the carpet. And then there's another situation of where there were some Israeli people, and in the opinion of some, they were actually filming what was going on, and they were very, very happy. And they're described as the dancing people. Make of that what you will. But anyway, that's just a few words and a few ideas and a few questions as regards 9/11. And we will await what Tucker Carlson will tell the rest of the world tomorrow. Thank you very much for watching as usual.